Hi, it's Ted Pattison. Welcome back to the Power BI Developer's Guide to Azure AD Security. This is part 4, where we're going to be covering developing for the app owns data model. Now, up to this point, parts 1 through 3 just looked at the fundamentals, how to get your code up and running, but now this is the first time we're actually creating a web application, and we're going to connect with the app owns data model. So eventually, we'll get to the code, which will be the client credential flow, and also we have to look at creating embed tokens. But we have to start with a little background on how to configure your Power BI environment just to support the app owns data model. When we use app owns data, we're going to use the client credential authentication flow to get an app only token. And some of the things to note is that we're going to work with app workspaces, and they have to be V2. You can't use the older style workspace. Also, the way that we're going to configure access for an app-only token is we have to go to the target workspaces and basically configure them by adding the service principal behind our app as a member, either as an admin member or a regular member. And there's nothing about this that's based on any type of permissions. It's just the fact that your service principal is recognized and it's been added as either an admin or a member of a workspace. Now, the way that we set this up is that we have to enable a tenant level setting. And we basically say that here is a Azure Active Directory group, and any service principals that we add into this group are then going to be able to call into the API. Now, remember that a service principal, could by default have the ability to create a new workspace. And if it creates a new workspace, it is the owner, it can access it. But for existing workspaces, they really can't go fishing. Instead, for existing workspaces, an app has to be configured, by being added, either as an admin or as a member. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how to set this up. Step 1, we're going to create a new group in Azure AD, and step 2, we're going to turn this tenant level switch on. Okay, let's begin by going to Azure AD, and inside the Azure AD portal, I'm going to go to groups. Let's go ahead and create a new group, and it can be any type of group. I'm just going to keep it a security group. What is the group name? So we'll call it Power BI Apps, and we'll go ahead and create this new group. And now that we have created this new group, let's now go over to Power BI. Let's go down to Admin Portal, and now let's go to Tenant Level Settings. In Tenant Level Settings, we're going to go down until the developer section. Here is the developer section. There is the allow service principal. And so we're going to go ahead and enable this property. We're going to take the Power BI groups that we've just created, Power BI app, and let's go ahead and apply. And there's a little thing saying it might take 15 minutes before my changes take effect. Okay, so now I have the tenant set up for app only authentication and service principal access. So my next step is to create a new application. And this time we're going to create it as a confidential web client. And it's a web client. There's no need for a redirect URL. So remember, when you're doing app only authentication, the redirect URL is never used. It's only used for user authentication. Now we're going to need to add a client secret or a client certificate. In my demo, I'm going to stick with the easier way, which is the client secret. And that can either be created through the Azure portal or with a PowerShell script. And remember, there's no need to configure any permissions, because even if you did, they would be totally useless to an application that uses the app owns data model, because permissions aren't used with app only authentication. Okay, so here we are back in the Azure portal looking at our Azure AD app registrations. We have the one we registered earlier. But now what we'll do is let's go ahead and run a PowerShell script. So this one's going to call new Azure AD application. Now we're going to say public client equals false. We're going to register this as a confidential web client. We're also going to create a app secret, which kind of acts like a password. So here's a technique where I create a new GUID. I convert it to a base 64 string, put an equal sign on the end. You have to do a couple other things to this password credential, give it a start date, end date. But we should be able to run this right here. And as we run this, it should create a new application. Let's go back here, and I'll go ahead and refresh. And what we should see is we've just created the app owns data app. If I open that up, Well, there's the application ID. Here's the service principal. Note that if I go to permissions, there's no permissions. We don't need any. If we go to certificates and secrets, note that I have created a new client secret or application secret. Note if you wanted to create it by hand, I can go ahead and create secret 2 here. So it's not required that you only have one, but my PowerShell script created it, and my PowerShell script also gives me back the application ID and the application secret. And also, we're going to need to know the tenant name when we do an app-only authentication. Okay, so now we've gotten the Azure AD app created, so there's just a couple more steps. Step number 1 is we'll take the service principal for our new application, and we'll add it into that Power BI app group so that it can call into the Power BI Service API, and then we'll have to go to our target workspace and configure the service principal either as a workspace admin or a workspace member. And once I have permission set up, we'll be able to run the application. Okay, so now we've created this app. And so remember that an app has a service principal behind it. So the next step that we're going to go through is we're going to go back into groups. We're going to find that one group that we created earlier, and we're going to go into the members. Doesn't have any members yet. Let's go ahead and add a member. And so what do we want to add? We want to add the app owns data app, and now it is a member. And the idea is that now it's in a group that enables it to call to the Power BI Service API. We need that permission first. The second thing now is let's go back to Power BI. Let's go back to our target workspace. Let's now go into access. And so here we're going to look for the app owns data app. There's the app owns data app. So now we're adding the service principal, and the 2 levels that are supported is adding it as an admin. And now your app only token will have full control over anything we do inside this workspace, or you can add it as a member so it doesn't have quite so much control. But now you've configured things so your app has the access that it needs. Okay, now onto the code. So when we use app owns data embedding, it turns out that the code to get an access token is incredibly simple. All you need is the client ID, the client secret, and the tenant name, and then you're going to be able to create a new particular application. This time it's going to be a confidential client application builder. We call the build method, and note that we now say acquire token from client. We pass whatever scopes that we need, and we're just going to basically pass the default scope. Scopes are kind of irrelevant, but you have to pass something inside there. But now I get back the app only access token. Now remember that when you get this token back, in the app only data model, you have 100 or 1,000 different users, but now you have one token that you've used that has admin permissions on the workspace, and the last thing you want to do is take a really powerful token and push it back into the browser for 100 or 1,000 different users. That's a huge security vulnerability. So instead, we're going to create embed tokens. Now, the idea with an embed token is that after you get the data you need for embedding a report or for a dashboard, we then make another call to the Power BI Service API to get a special type of token, which is called an embed token. Now, embed tokens are often created just for one resource, one report, one particular dashboard. Note that when you work with reports, you can put reports into edit mode so the user can make modifications, and then you need to generate an embed token that has basically edit capabilities. Now, let's look at a couple examples. So here's an example of an app owns data method that is going to, first of all, get the information it needs about a particular report, such as the embed URL. Then it generates a embed token. And once it gets all that information, it can pass it all back to the client. Okay, here's an example of getting data for a dashboard. Same drill of getting the data you need for the dashboard, such as the embed URL, making a second call to get the embed token. So now we pass the embed token back to the browser, and the embed token is very constrained as far as what it can do. Note that it's also possible to create an embed token for giving the user a new report. And in that case, you create an embed token. What you can see here is the access level is create, and the actual token is based on the data set, because if you're creating a report, there's no existing report to base the embed token on. Now, it's also possible to work with role-level security. Even though you're not running as a particular user, you're basically running as a server-side daemon account. You have to authenticate users. So as you create an app owns data application, you have to be aware that even though you're calling into Power BI with the same admin permissions, you have different users, and you have to know which users you can give more data to and which users should only see a constrained set of data. So when you're working with the app owns data model, what you're able to do is when you generate a request token, you can embed the effective identity inside there, and you can specify what roles that user can see. So once again, here's another example where we're going to create some embedding data. And in our case, we're going to see, is the user an admin? So my application would have to have some idea of what users were admin, what users were not. But then after discovering that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a embed token that is just view permissions for regular users, but edit permissions for administrators. So once again, we're able to do something where we're able to pass the roles through, as we use the app owns data model. Okay, to test the application, first thing we have to make sure is that the application ID, the application secret, and the tenant name are added into the web.config file. Okay, and then we have the embedding manager class. And the idea here is that if I look at get app only access token, this is how we get access tokens. Let's go ahead and fire up the application. And as I fire this up, let's also go ahead and bring up our friend Fiddler here. Let's go ahead and do a remove all. As we now want to look at something like a report, what we should be able to see here is that there is the call right here where we're getting back a access token. So remember that for app only access tokens, there is no ID token because there's no human, and there's no refresh token. Refresh tokens are mainly there to prevent interactivity in user authentication. And the idea that with an access token, we just make a server to server call, we don't really need refresh tokens. There's still token caching for access tokens, but we don't have the same need for refresh tokens inside. And so if you test this little application, well, we can basically get to the report. And note over here that when I want to look at a report, well, the first thing we need is we need to get data back about the report itself, such as what is the embed URL, but now if we look at here, here is the code that's going to generate the access token, which is the embed token, and that token comes back, and now I can go ahead and pass that back to the client. And as we go through the application, we'll be able to embed to a report, we'll be able to embed to a dashboard. Also note that we support Q&A embedding, so that you're able to embed a Q&A and preset a question inside there. Okay, and then also if someone wants to create a new report, you can embed a new report based on top of a data set. And now if we just do a hello world here, let's go ahead and take sales revenue and we'll take the year. We'll create a very simple report, but now let's go ahead and do a save as. And now we'll save this as Bob's your uncle. And once we've done that, now we've got this new report. If we go back to Power BI, and we go back to that workspace in question, what you can see is that with Power BI embedding, you can embed a new report allowing users that have no Power BI license to basically save new reports and to customize existing reports. Okay, congratulations. You made it to the end of part 4, developing with the app owns data model. You've learned about how to configure your Power BI environment to support a service principal. You figured out how to authenticate as a service principal using client credential flow. And then you also learned the importance of generating and working with embed tokens with the app owns data model. Okay, so now that we've covered the app owns data, the last 2 parts in this series focus on the user owns data model. The simpler way is to do everything on the client side with a single page application and the Microsoft authentication libraries with the JavaScript version. That's what we're going to cover next.